A dog refuses to leave an abandoned cabin. What rescuers found inside will leave you speechless. Spike stood firmly in front of the old cabin, growling low at the group of volunteers who had followed him into the woods. Laura tightened her grip on the leash in her hand, her instincts telling her that something was wrong. This wasn't just a dog abandoned in the wilderness. Spike was protecting something, or someone. "Let's try again," Laura said, gesturing for her team to stay back. She crouched low, extending a piece of jerky towards Spike. "Hey buddy, it's okay. We're here to help." Spike didn't budge. His golden coat gleamed in the fading sunlight, his body tense and alert. He barked sharply once, his gaze darting toward the partially open cabin door before locking back onto Laura. "Laura," called Ben, one of the volunteers, from behind her. "He's not gonna let us get closer." "What's in there?" "I don't know," Laura replied without looking back. "But he's not acting like a stray. This dog has a purpose." Ben hesitated, then stepped closer, keeping his voice low. "You think he's guarding something? Or someone?" Laura didn't answer immediately. She didn't have to. The urgency in Spike's stance spoke louder than any words. Whatever was inside that cabin, Spike wasn't leaving it, or letting anyone near it, without a fight. Taking a deep breath, Laura stood and motioned for Ben to follow her a few steps back. The rest of the team hovered nearby, their flashlights casting long beams into the thickening dusk. "Listen," Laura said, lowering her voice. "We don't force it. If Spike's this protective, there's a reason. Let's set up some lights and see if we can coax him out. He'll lead us to whatever he's protecting in his own time." As they moved to retrieve their equipment, Spike took a cautious step forward, then another, as if testing their intentions. Laura froze, her breath catching. Spike's head turned toward the door, his ears pricking up. For a moment, it was as though he was listening for something inside. Then a sound came, a faint rustling like movement from within the cabin. Laura's heart raced. Someone was inside. "Did you hear that?" Ben whispered. Laura nodded, her eyes fixed on the cabin. Slowly, she crouched again, keeping her movements deliberate and calm. "Spike," she murmured, her voice gentle but firm. "Show me. What's in there?" Spike barked again, louder this time, and then turned his head sharply toward the door. He barked once more, then looked back at Laura, his tail wagging slightly but his stance still guarded. "I think he's trying to tell us something," Laura said, standing. "Ben, call for backup. We're going in." As Ben moved to grab his radio, Laura took a hesitant step towards Spike. For the first time, the dog didn't growl. Instead, he sat down, his body blocking the entrance as though making one last plea for caution. "Okay, Spike," Laura whispered. "We'll do this your way." Whatever they were about to uncover in that cabin, she knew one thing for certain. It wasn't going to be ordinary. Laura's heart pounded as she stood frozen outside the cabin, Spike's sharp bark echoing in her ears. The sound from within had been faint but unmistakable. Someone or something was inside. Her years of experience as a veterinarian and animal rescuer had taught her to trust a dog's instincts, and Spike's behavior left no doubt. He was protecting whatever was in that cabin. Ben returned to her side, his radio still in hand. "Backup is on the way," he said, keeping his voice low. "But it's a 30-minute hike back to the main road. What do we do until then?" Laura crouched again, maintaining eye contact with Spike. "We keep him calm," she said. "He trusts us more than he did earlier, but we need to prove we're not a threat." Ben sighed, glancing at the cabin door. "What if it's dangerous? What if we're walking into a situation we can't handle?" Laura didn't answer. Instead, she focused on Spike, holding out another piece of jerky. "Come on, Spike. You showed us this much. Help us a little more." Spike hesitated, his amber eyes flicking between Laura and the door. Finally, he stood, taking a few cautious steps toward her. Laura froze, her breath caught in her throat. The dog sniffed the air, then gently took the jerky from her hand, his body relaxing just slightly. "That's it," she whispered, her tone soothing. "Good boy." Spike's tail wagged faintly, but he quickly turned back to the cabin, positioning himself in front of the door once more. It was clear he wasn't going to move until he was sure they understood his message. Ben shifted uneasily behind her. "Laura, we can't just sit here waiting for backup. If there's someone inside—" "I know," she interrupted, standing slowly. "But we're not rushing in blind. Spike's guarding this place for a reason. We follow his lead." She approached the cabin cautiously, her movements deliberate and unthreatening. Spike didn't growl this time, but his ears twitched, and he let out a soft whine as she neared the threshold. Laura reached for the doorknob and paused, glancing down at Spike. "You're not going to bite me, are you?" she murmured. The dog gave a short huff as if answering her question. She pushed the door open gently. The creak of the old hinges broke the silence, and a musty smell wafted out. The interior was dimly lit by the fading sunlight filtering through the cracks in the wooden walls. At first glance, the space appeared empty, a simple, dusty room with a few scattered items. A torn blanket, an empty water bottle, and what looked like a pile of clothes in the corner. But then Laura heard it again. A faint rustle, coming from behind a wooden crate near the far wall. "Ben," she called softly, her eyes locked on the movement. "There's definitely someone here." Spike moved past her, his posture still alert but less aggressive. He stopped near the crate, barking sharply, then looking back at Laura as if urging her to follow. Laura's heart raced as she crossed the room. She knelt beside the crate, her hand hovering over it for a moment before pulling it aside. There, huddled against the wall, was a teenage girl. Her face was pale, her clothes dirty and torn, and her wide, fearful eyes met Laura's. She flinched, curling into herself as though expecting a blow. "Hey, it's okay," Laura said softly, holding up her hands to show she meant no harm. "You're safe now. I promise." The girl didn't respond, her gaze darting between Laura and Spike. The dog stepped forward, nuzzling her shoulder gently, and for the first time, Laura saw her expression soften. Ben's voice broke the silence. "Who is she? What's she doing out here?" Laura didn't look away from the girl. "I don't know," she said, her voice steady but laced with determination. "But we're going to find out." Spike sat beside the girl, his protective stance unwavering. Whatever this girl had been through, Laura knew one thing: Spike had kept her alive. Laura crouched beside the girl, her hands steady and voice calm. "My name is Laura. I'm here to help." Her eyes searched the teenager's face, noting the dirt smudged across her cheeks and the gaunt look of someone who hadn't had a proper meal in weeks. The girl trembled, her eyes darting to Spike as though seeking reassurance. The golden retriever stayed close, pressing his warm body against her side. "Do you have a name?" Laura asked softly. She didn't expect an answer right away, the girl was clearly in shock. The silence stretched, broken only by the faint rustling of leaves outside. Ben, standing near the cabin door, shifted uneasily. "Laura, she needs medical attention. We should—" "I know," Laura interrupted, keeping her voice gentle but firm. "But we can't push her. Let her feel safe first." The girl's lips parted and her voice came out in a hoarse whisper. "Anne?" Laura's heart leapt at the sound. "Anne? That's a beautiful name," she said, smiling gently. "And, can you tell me if you're hurt? Anywhere that needs attention?" Anne hesitated, then shook her head. Her hands gripped Spike's fur tightly as though he were her lifeline. Laura glanced at Ben, who had moved closer. "Get the first aid kit from my bag," she said. "Just in case." As Ben stepped outside, Laura turned back to Anne. "How long have you been here?" Anne didn't respond immediately. Her gaze dropped to the floor, her fingers still tangled in Spike's fur. After a moment, she whispered, "I don't know, weeks?" Laura's breath caught. Weeks. That meant Anne had been living alone, surviving off what little she could find. Spike must have been her only company. "Were you lost?" Laura asked, trying to piece together the story. Anne nodded, her movements slow and hesitant. "I got separated. From my group. In the woods." Her voice cracked and she swallowed hard, her body tensing as if reliving the moment. Spike nuzzled her hand, breaking her from the memory. She looked at him, her eyes filling with gratitude. "He found me," she said, her voice barely audible. "He wouldn't leave me." Laura's chest tightened. She had seen animals show loyalty before, but what Spike had done was extraordinary. "He brought you food?" And nodded again. "From the woods? From somewhere?" Her voice trailed off, her exhaustion evident. Ben returned with the first aid kit, setting it down beside Laura. "Backup is about 10 minutes out," he said. "What's the plan?" Laura opened the kit, pulling out a bottle of water and a granola bar. "The plan," she said, glancing at Anne, "is to get her out of here safely." She handed the water to Anne, who took it with shaky hands. As the girl drank, Laura felt a wave of determination wash over her. Whatever Anne had endured, it wasn't over yet. She would need help, care, and trust to rebuild her life. Spike's tail wagged faintly as he watched and drank. Laura placed a hand on his head, her voice quiet. "You did good, buddy. You saved her." Outside, the sound of approaching footsteps signaled the arrival of backup. Laura stood looking back at Anne. "We're going to get you somewhere safe, okay? You don't have to be scared anymore." Anne hesitated, then nodded slowly. Her grip on Spike didn't loosen, and Laura knew the dog would stay by her side. As the rescuers entered the cabin, Laura stepped back, her mind already racing with what needed to happen next. And wasn't just a survivor, she was proof of the incredible bond between humans and animals. And that bond, Laura realized, might be the key to saving Anne's spirit as well as her life. As the rescuers guided Anne out of the cabin, Spike stayed firmly at her side, his tail swishing gently as if to reassure her with each step. Anne's frail body leaned heavily on Laura, her legs shaky from weeks of malnutrition and exhaustion. The team moved carefully, speaking in hushed tones to avoid overwhelming her. When they reached the clearing outside and hesitated, her wide eyes darting to the woods surrounding the cabin. She clutched Spike's fur tightly, her breathing quickening. "What's wrong?" Laura asked softly, her hand steady on Anne's shoulder. And didn't answer immediately. She stared at the dense trees as if expecting something, or someone, to emerge. "The woods," she murmured, her voice trembling. "They're dangerous. At night it's worse." Laura exchanged a glance with Ben, her brow furrowed. "What do you mean, Anne? Did you see something out there?" Anne shook her head but didn't meet Laura's gaze. "Just noises. I stayed inside. Spike kept them away." Laura crouched to Anne's level, her tone calm but firm. "You're safe now. Whatever was out there, it can't hurt you anymore. We're taking you somewhere safe." Anne nodded faintly, but her grip on Spike didn't loosen. The group began their trek back toward the main road, the fading light of the day casting long shadows across the forest floor. Spike walked close to Anne, occasionally looking back toward the cabin as if to ensure nothing followed. As they moved, Laura tried to coax more details from Anne. "Can you tell me where you were before you got lost? Were you with family or friends?" Anne's expression tightened and she shook her head. "A school group," she said quietly. "We were hiking. I got separated. They didn't come back for me." Laura's chest ached at the thought. A young girl lost and alone in the wilderness, left to fend for herself. "And Spike found you," she said, her voice soft. Anne's eyes softened as she glanced at the golden retriever. "He saved me," she whispered. "Every time I thought I couldn't make it another day, he was there. He kept me warm. He brought food." Ben, walking just ahead, overheard and turned to Laura. "Where did Spike come from anyway? He doesn't look like a stray. He's healthy, strong, he's not like the dogs we usually find out here." Laura shook her head. "I don't know. Maybe he got lost too. Or maybe he was meant to find her." Ben raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. Spike's presence felt almost uncanny, his loyalty and instincts far beyond what anyone could have expected. As they neared the main road, the sound of an approaching ambulance broke the quiet tension. Anne flinched at the noise, but Laura placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's just the paramedics. They'll take care of you." The ambulance came into view, its flashing lights illuminating the forest. Anne froze, panic flickering across her face. "I don't want to leave him," she said, her voice desperate. Laura crouched beside her again, her tone steady. "You won't. Spike will stay with you as long as you need him. I promise." Anne's grip on Spike loosened slightly and she nodded, her trust in Laura evident. The paramedics approached, their expressions gentle as they assessed Anne's condition. Laura explained the situation quickly, ensuring Anne wouldn't be overwhelmed by too many questions at once. When they lifted Anne onto the stretcher, Spike jumped up beside her, his protective stance unwavering. The paramedics hesitated, but Laura waved them on. "Let him stay," she said. "She needs him." As the ambulance doors closed, Laura stood back, watching as it drove away. The woods fell silent again, but the weight of what had just unfolded lingered heavily in the air. Ben broke the quiet. "So what now?" Laura exhaled slowly. "Now we find out where Spike came from. And we figure out how a dog like him ended up saving a girl like Anne." She looked back toward the cabin, its dark silhouette barely visible in the growing shadows. Something about that place felt unfinished, like it held answers they hadn't yet uncovered. And Laura knew she wouldn't rest until she found them. The hospital room was quiet except for the soft hum of machines monitoring Anne's recovery. Spike sat at her bedside, his head resting gently on her lap. His unwavering presence seemed to soothe her, even as she struggled to process everything that had happened. Laura stood nearby, her arms crossed, watching Anne with a mixture of relief and concern. The girl had been through more than most could handle, and Laura knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. "How's she doing?" Ben's voice broke the silence as he entered the room, holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Laura, his expression serious. "She's stable," Laura replied, taking the cup without looking away from Anne. "Physically she's going to be okay. But emotionally?" Ben nodded, glancing at the golden retriever. Spike hasn't left her side, has he? Laura smiled faintly. Not once. He's the only reason she's holding it together right now. And stirred slightly, her hand moving to rest on Spike's head. Her eyes fluttered open and for a moment she looked disoriented. Then her gaze landed on Spike and a small, fragile smile appeared. Hey, Laura said softly, stepping closer. How are you feeling? And shrugged, her voice barely audible. Tired? Laura pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat down. That's normal. Your body's been through a lot. But you're safe now, Anne. You're going to be okay. Anne's eyes flicked toward the window, her expression distant. I didn't think I'd ever be safe again, she whispered. Not after. Her voice trailed off and she tightened her grip on Spike's fur. Laura waited, giving her the space to continue if she was ready. I thought they'd come back for me, and said after a long pause. The group. But they didn't. I waited for hours and then it got dark. I didn't know what to do. Her voice broke and Laura leaned forward, her tone gentle. You don't have to talk about it if you're not ready. And shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. I want to. I need to. She took a shaky breath, her fingers brushing Spike's fur for comfort. I started walking, trying to find my way back. But the woods, it's so easy to get lost. I ran out of food after a couple of days. I thought. She hesitated, her voice faltering. I thought I was going to die. Laura's heart ached at the words, but she kept her expression calm, encouraging Anne to continue. And then he showed up, and said, glancing at Spike. Out of nowhere. I don't even know where he came from. He was there. Like he knew I needed him. Laura reached out and gently placed a hand on Anne's. Spike saved your life. And nodded, her tears spilling over. He did more than that. He kept me going when I wanted to give up. He brought me food, stayed close at night to keep me warm. I wouldn't have made it without him. Spike lifted his head at the sound of her voice, his tail wagging faintly. And smiled through her tears and stroked his head. Ben, standing by the door, cleared his throat. She's right. That dog is incredible. But where did he come from? It's like he just appeared? Laura frowned, the question weighing on her. I don't know. But we're going to find out. And looked at Laura, her expression filled with quiet determination. He's not just a dog, she said. He's more than that. Laura nodded, her gaze shifting to Spike. I believe you, Anne. And we're going to make sure his story, and yours, gets told. As the room fell into silence again, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to uncover. Spike's past, Anne's survival, and the strange pull of that cabin in the woods. They were all pieces of a puzzle she was determined to solve. The following morning, sunlight streamed through the hospital window, casting a soft glow over Anne and Spike. Laura entered the room quietly, carrying a small tray of food. And was awake, sitting upright for the first time since her rescue. Her hand rested on Spike's head, absently scratching behind his ears as the golden retriever stayed by her side. You're looking better today, Laura said with a gentle smile, placing the tray on the bedside table. And gave a small nod. I feel a little stronger. Her voice was still soft, but there was more life in her tone. Good, Laura replied, pulling up a chair. You've been through a lot, but you're tougher than you think. And didn't respond immediately. Her eyes wandered to the tray of food, but she didn't reach for it. Spike nudged her arm with his nose as if encouraging her to eat. You can take your time, Laura said. There's no rush. And hesitated, then picked up a piece of toast. She nibbled at it slowly, her gaze shifting between Laura and Spike. What happens now? She asked after a moment. Laura leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. Now we make sure you're fully recovered. The doctors want to keep you here for a few more days to monitor your progress. After that, we'll figure out the next steps together. You're not alone in this, Anne. The girl's expression softened, though uncertainty lingered in her eyes. And Spike? What will happen to him? Laura smiled. Spike isn't going anywhere. He'll stay with you as long as you want him to. Anne's shoulders relaxed slightly, and she reached down to stroke Spike's fur. He's the only reason I made it out there, she murmured. He never gave up on me even when I wanted to give up on myself. Laura's throat tightened at the words, but she kept her voice steady. That's what makes him special. He saw something in you worth fighting for. And blinked back tears, her fingers tightening in Spike's fur. Do you think? She paused, gathering her thoughts. Do you think someone abandoned him? Or did he just find me? Laura considered the question carefully. It's hard to say. Dogs like Spike don't usually end up in the wild on their own. But maybe he was meant to find you. Sometimes things happen in ways we don't fully understand. And nodded, seeming to accept the answer. He saved me, she said again, her voice firm. Before Laura could respond, a knock sounded at the door. Ben stepped in holding a clipboard. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, glancing at Anne, "but I've been digging into that cabin. Thought you'd want to hear what I found." Laura stood, motioning for him to continue. "The place has been abandoned for years," Ben began. "It used to belong to a family, but they left after a tragedy, something about a fire nearby. No one's been back since." Anne stiffened at the mention of the cabin, and Spike let out a soft whine as if sensing her discomfort. Ben hesitated before adding, "But here's the strange part. There's no record of anyone else using it recently. No signs that someone was keeping it up, aside from what we saw inside." Laura frowned, her mind racing. Then where did Spike come from? And how did Anne survive so long without anyone noticing? Anne's voice broke the silence. "Spike kept me alive," she said quietly. "He found food. He brought it back to me. It's like he knew." Ben raised an eyebrow, looking at Laura. "You think the dog was scavenging from the village?" "Maybe," Laura said, though the idea didn't sit right with her. "Or maybe there's more to this story than we realize." And looked between them, her grip on Spike tightening. "He's not just a dog," she said again, her voice resolute. "He's my hero." Laura met Anne's gaze, her determination mirroring the girl's. "Then we owe it to him, and to you, to find out the rest of the story." Spike's tail thumped against the bed as if in agreement, his amber eyes filled with unwavering loyalty. Whatever the answers were, Laura knew they wouldn't stop until they uncovered the truth behind the extraordinary bond that had saved Anne's life. 2 days later, the hospital buzzed with a quiet energy as word of Anne's rescue spread. Nurses stopped by to check on her more often than necessary, always sneaking glances at Spike, who remained a constant presence at her side. He had become something of a local celebrity, his story sparking admiration and curiosity alike. Laura arrived mid-morning carrying a bag of supplies and a warm smile. "Morning, Anne," she greeted, setting the bag on a nearby chair. "How are we feeling today?" Anne shrugged but managed a small smile. "Better, I think." Her color had returned, and the dark circles under her eyes had started to fade. Spike, ever vigilant, perked up at the sound of Laura's voice. His tail wagged lazily, but he didn't move from his spot next to Anne. "I brought a little something for Spike," Laura said, reaching into the bag and pulling out a brand new collar. The dark leather was simple, but the tag attached gleamed with Spike's name and a contact number. Anne's eyes lit up as she took the collar in her hands. "It's perfect," she murmured, running her fingers over the engraved letters. "He deserves it," Laura said. "A hero should have something to show for it, don't you think?" Anne nodded, her smile growing as she carefully fastened the collar around Spike's neck. The dog sat patiently, his tail wagging harder once the clasp clicked into place. "Looks good on you, buddy," Laura said, scratching behind his ears. As the moment passed, Anne's expression turned more serious. "Laura," she began hesitantly, "what happens next? I mean, after I leave here?" Laura sat down beside her, her tone gentle. "That's up to you, Anne. You're safe now and we'll help you figure out the next steps. Your parents have been contacted and they're on their way." And looked down, her fingers brushing Spike's fur. "I don't know if I can face them. It's been so long. What if they're different? What if they blame me for getting lost?" Laura leaned forward, her voice steady. "And your parents love you. They've been worried about you every single day since you went missing. Seeing you again will be the best thing that's happened to them in months. Trust me on this." And swallowed hard, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "And Spike? Can I keep him?" Laura hesitated, not because she doubted the bond between them, but because she knew the decision wasn't entirely hers. "We'll figure that out too," she said finally. "But I can promise you this, Spike isn't going anywhere for now." The room fell into a comfortable silence, broken only by the soft rustle of Spike shifting positions to nuzzle Anne's side. Before long, a soft knock at the door signaled Ben's arrival. He entered with his usual clipboard, a thoughtful look on his face. "I've been looking into Spike's background," he began without preamble. "Talked to a few locals and checked the shelters in the area. No missing dog reports that match his description, and no one seems to know where he came from." Laura frowned. "So he just appeared?" Ben nodded. "Seems that way. It's like he came out of nowhere, just in time to find Anne." And looked at Spike, her expression soft but resolute. "I told you," she said quietly. "He's more than just a dog." Ben chuckled, though there was no mockery in his tone. "You might be right about that, Anne." Laura stood, her mind turning over the pieces of the puzzle. Whatever his story is, one thing's for sure, he saved Anne's life. And that makes him a hero in my book." As they spoke, Spike lay contentedly at Anne's feet, his eyes half closed but his ears twitching at every sound. Whatever mysteries surrounded him, one truth was undeniable. He had found and when she needed him most, and he wasn't about to let her go. For now that was enough. The quiet of Anne's hospital room was interrupted by a knock at the door. Laura stood from her chair, exchanging a quick glance with Anne. "That must be them," she said softly, her voice calm but carrying a weight of significance. Anne's fingers curled tightly in Spike's fur. Her body tensed and her breathing quickened. "What if they don't recognize me?" she whispered. "They will," Laura assured her, stepping toward the door. "They've been waiting for this moment since the day you went missing." Spike nudged Anne's hand with his nose, his golden eyes full of reassurance. She swallowed hard and nodded, bracing herself as Laura opened the door. A man and woman stepped inside, their faces lined with exhaustion but filled with hope. The mother's breath hitched the moment her eyes fell on Anne. "Oh my God! Anne," she cried, rushing forward. And froze for a moment, overwhelmed by the flood of emotions. Then, as if a dam broke, she let go of Spike and threw herself into her mother's arms. Tears streamed down both their faces as they held each other tightly. The father joined them, his hands trembling as he rested them on Anne's shoulders. "We thought we'd lost you," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "We never stopped looking." And clung to them, her sobs muffled against her mother's shoulder. I thought you'd given up on me." Her mother pulled back just enough to cup Anne's face in her hands. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a second. We've been praying for this moment every single day." Spike sat patiently beside them, his tail wagging softly as if sensing the weight of the reunion. The father crouched down, his eyes falling on the dog. "And this must be the hero who brought her back to us?" And sniffled, wiping her tears as she glanced at Spike. "This is Spike," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "He saved me. He kept me alive when I didn't think I could survive." The father reached out, his hand resting gently on Spike's head. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you for bringing our daughter back to us." Laura watched the scene unfold, her own throat tightening with emotion. Moments like this were rare, pure, unfiltered, and filled with the kind of love that could heal even the deepest wounds. As the family embraced again, Spike leaned into Anne, his presence a steady reminder of the bond they shared. Laura stepped closer, her voice soft. "This reunion is just the beginning," she said. "Anne's been through a lot, and it'll take time to heal completely. But with you here and with Spike, I think she's going to be okay." Anne's mother turned to Laura, tears still streaming down her face. "We owe you so much. You and Spike. We can never thank you enough." Laura shook her head, smiling faintly. "Spike did most of the work. I was just lucky enough to see it happen." And looked at Spike, her hand resting gently on his collar. "He's not just a dog," she said again, her voice steadier now. "He's family." The weight of her words settled over the room, and for a moment, there was silence. The kind of silence that carried understanding, love, and hope. As the family began to make plans for Anne's discharge, Spike stayed close, his unwavering loyalty a testament to the connection that had saved her life. And though there were still unanswered questions about where he had come from, one truth was clear. He had found his place. And in Anne's heart, Spike was home. 2 weeks had passed since Anne's discharge from the hospital. The world beyond the cabin and hospital walls had felt overwhelming at first, but she was slowly adjusting. Spike never left her side, a steady source of comfort and courage as she took each day one step at a time. Laura stood in front of a small crowd gathered at the local community center. News of Spike and Anne's story had spread far beyond the town, drawing attention to the extraordinary bond between the two. A reporter snapped photos as Anne shyly sat in the front row, Spike at her feet, his new collar gleaming under the lights. "Today," Laura began, her voice clear but warm, "we celebrate not just the incredible survival of a young girl but the loyalty and courage of an animal who refused to give up on her. Spike is a reminder of the bond we share with animals, one that goes far beyond words." The audience applauded, and Anne glanced at Spike, smiling softly as she rested her hand on his head. He looked up at her, his tail thumping against the floor. After the applause faded, Laura continued. "But this story is also about resilience, and strength to hold on, to keep going, and to trust in the face of unimaginable challenges. It's a story that reminds us of the power of hope and connection, even in our darkest moments." Anne's parents beamed with pride, their hands clasped tightly as they watched their daughter. Tears shimmered in their eyes, a reflection of both relief and gratitude. When Laura finished her speech, the crowd rose to their feet, the applause swelling into a standing ovation. And blushed but stood as well, bending to give Spike a hug. After the event, Laura found Anne and her family near the entrance. "How are you holding up?" she asked gently. And smiled, her confidence growing each day. "Better. It's a little scary, but it's nice to see people care." "They do," Laura assured her. "Your story is inspiring people. It's showing them what's possible when we don't give up." Anne's mother touched Laura's arm. "We can never thank you enough for what you've done. For bringing her back to us." Laura shook her head. "I didn't bring her back. Spike did." And knelt beside Spike, her fingers brushing over his fur. "He's my hero," she said softly. As they spoke, a man approached, carrying a clipboard and wearing a badge with the local Animal Rescues logo. He stopped in front of Anne, his expression kind. "Hi Anne," he said. "I'm Greg. I've been following Spike's story and I wanted to talk to you about something." And stood, holding Spike's collar protectively. "What is it?" Greg smiled. "I've been working in animal rescue for years and I've never seen a story like yours. Spike's instincts, his determination to protect you, it's extraordinary. I was wondering if you'd let him be part of a new program we're starting." "What kind of program?" Anne asked, her tone cautious but curious. "It's a therapy program," Greg explained. "We'll work with dogs like Spike to help people who've been through trauma. They'll visit hospitals, schools, and shelters to give comfort to those in need. He's already a hero, but this could help him change even more lives." And looked down at Spike, her heart swelling with pride. "Only if I can be there with him?" Greg grinned. "I wouldn't have it any other way." Laura smiled, watching as Anne's face lit up. It was the perfect continuation of their journey, a way to turn their pain into something meaningful, to share the bond that had saved her with others who needed it. As the sun set that evening and sat in her backyard with Spike, her parents nearby, the golden retriever lay beside her, his head resting in her lap. "You're more than a hero," she whispered, stroking his fur. "You're my best friend." Spike let out a soft huff, his tail wagging against the grass, and looked toward the horizon, the weight of her past finally starting to lift. She wasn't just a survivor, she was part of something bigger now, something that gave her hope. And with Spike by her side, she knew she could face anything the future held. As Anne gently stroked Spike's golden fur under the fading light of the evening, their journey came full circle, a story of survival, courage, and an unbreakable bond that transcended words. Spike wasn't just a hero, he was a symbol of hope, of the quiet strength we often overlook in the chaos of life. Sometimes the smallest acts of loyalty can create ripples of change, reminding us that even in our darkest moments, there is always light waiting to guide us home. What about you? Have you ever experienced a bond so powerful it changed your life? Share your story in the comments below, we'd love to hear it. And if this journey of Anne and Spike touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to see the power of hope, and subscribe for more stories that move and inspire. Because sometimes, all it takes is a single moment of connection to change everything.